How can you succeed at the LSAT? What are best practices for taking the LSAT this fall, this application cycle? Today, we are so excited because we are joined by Reggie from LSAT Demon, and he's going to talk to us all about the LSAT. For those of you who are new and are just now joining us, my name is Sydney Montgomery, and I'm the founder and executive director here at Barrier Breakers, where we work with all students, but we specialize in working with first-generation, minority, and immigrant students on the college and law school application process. And today, I am joined by Reggie Whittaker, and he is going to tell you a little bit about his journey. He is an amazing professional tutor. You know, guys, I'm always on the lookout for amazing tutors, especially tutors of color, tutors that understand a first-gen or marginalized experience, because I think it's important, and we'll get into that, to feel comfortable with the tutor that you're working with. And I have seen in our own students how that has made a big difference in their LSAT tests, their practice, their mindset about the test. Everything about the process can change if you have the right support system around you. So we're really excited to have Reggie. Reggie, thank you and welcome.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, why don't you tell us just a little bit about your journey to becoming an LSAT tutor, and maybe what challenges you faced as you were preparing for the LSAT and how you overcame them?
Yeah. So I started my LSAT journey very, very early, which I don't recommend these days or really for anyone, but I started studying for the LSAT in high school, really. And by studying, I just meant kind of like looking at it. I maybe took a practice test or two, because I was encouraged to go into law by members of my church, and they gave me some materials. And then went through college, kind of forgot about law or going to law school. It was always like in the back of my mind, but it wasn't necessarily my goal. And then COVID happened, and I had just graduated college. A lot of things kind of changed for me. And I kind of focused or decided that a legal career was probably going to be the most likely long-term career goal for me. And so then I started studying for the LSAT. I kind of was on and off with my prep just because I wasn't seeing the improvement that I wanted to see. I used a couple different programs, and some of them I saw some success with, but I felt like I was capable. I felt like the test was really learnable, but I felt like I wasn't given the tools to learn them quite yet. And yeah, the exam felt difficult, but in a way that it just didn't feel justified. Like I felt like I should have been able to learn more. Eventually I did. I was able to find LSAT Demon, and that got me to where I am now. I was lucky enough to score a 180 this January. And yeah, so now I kind of tutor other people. I actually found that I love instructing other students, more so than necessarily practicing law, which I obviously haven't done yet, but I'm still, debating if that is what I want to do. So I'm putting my applications off for a little bit and just teaching for a while.
I don't blame you. As someone who did practice law and then decided that I really loved working with students on the process, I can understand making that pivot to realizing, yeah, I actually really love being an instructor, and I really love working with people on this part of the process. I would never be an LSAT tutor, so I always have really great respect for those that are. Like, I took that test one time well over, a decade ago at this point, and that's the one time I'm going to take it. And now and that's the only time I was going to think about it. Immediately
Hmm.
after I took the exam, I dumped everything out of my memory. So I always have really great respect for those of you who not just succeed and excel at this exam, but really then give back to others. In your experience, what unique challenges do students face, especially students that come from marginalized backgrounds, when it comes to this exam? And how do those challenges impact their mindset and maybe their study strategies?
Yeah. I think the biggest hurdle for a lot of students, particularly those who are marginalized, are the financial hurdles. LSAT prep is really expensive, and it's unfortunate, but it's hard to find free resources or cheap resources out there, and especially resources that are more individualized. like tutoring, right? Tutoring is really a luxury that a lot of people can't afford. I wasn't able to afford one-on-one tutoring, and luckily I didn't feel like I needed it. But some students do need that level of help, right? Um, yeah, so I think that was the largest hurdle for me and for I think a lot of other students, and it I think affects students because they don't feel as if they have the tools or like they're not well equipped enough to
Yeah.
really tackle the LSAT because they don't have the same help that a lot of other students have. And yeah, I think that can affect their study because they're just looking for the cheapest option. And sometimes the cheapest option isn't always the best option. And yeah, I found that like I was able to use a prep company that had a great fee waiver discount. And it was amazing. I genuinely think that is a great thing that they have. It only cost me $1, right, to use. So it was essentially free to use this resource. And I think the resource is great for a lot of students. It wasn't perfect for me. And so then I was able to find something that was better for me, but it was still, a strain financially. And I was lucky enough to be able to afford it, but I know a lot of other people can't. And so, yeah, I think that's the largest hurdle.
Yeah, I definitely think it's something that our students struggle with. I always tell them, you don't want to just choose a bunch of different LSAT prep courses because
Mhm.
I always say sometimes it's best to invest in one really good option than this $20 thing, this $30 thing, this $10 thing. And now you have a lot of different study tools that are probably competing with each other. Maybe you're learning 4 or 5 different strategies for the same question type. You don't know which one to use because you've kind of created this hodgepodge, and time is something we can't get back in the law school application process. So, you know, you could have been somewhere else, but the last 5 months you've been kind of doing all of this, and now it's the fall and you're still kind of where you were in the spring,
Mhm.
but you don't really have any more time. And I think that's something that's really difficult because I can understand. I mean, I didn't have a tutor for the LSAT either. That was not a thing. That was not a thing. And so I really had to do and work with the course that I had. I know here at Barrier Breakers we're really grateful that we are able to have good relationships with a lot of providers, some of whom may have discounts or may have things for fee waivers students. I know LSAT Demon has some discounts for students with fee waivers, but I think it's still really important that students invest in themselves in this process. And you're right, some students, no matter what, even if they start with a course, they're going to need a tutor. And we're really grateful for every once in a while we have some pro bono tutors. I know you've done some pro bono work for us. We've had other volunteer tutors, and that's something that I'm really passionate about. But then some students need to pay for tutoring, and being able to afford that if that's something that you need can be a barrier, but it can make a really big difference in terms of scholarship money at the end, right? So I sometimes also say you're going to pay early. You can invest in good prep, you can invest in good application support, and get more scholarships. Or maybe if you don't, you're going to end up having maybe not as many scholarships as you otherwise would have. But I think this gets to the question of like those systemic barriers when we're talking about financial constraints, right? Systemic barriers can often affect access and resources available to students of color, first gen students. How can we think about addressing those systemic barriers or students that find themselves kind of going uphill against some of these systemic barriers when they're thinking about the LSAT, not just financially, but even when we talk about schooling or preparedness for a test like the LSAT exam?
Mm. Yeah, I think the largest thing that I can recommend is people who are kind of in our position, like you and me, right? We took the LSAT. We are, beyond at least a lot of the application uh, process, right? I haven't applied to law school, so for me, it's just the LSAT. That's what I have experience with. But providing that knowledge that I have to students, right? And that is my main focus and what I am the most passionate about. And, whatever anyone who has gone through the process knows or, is knowledgeable about, right, you don't have to be a professional tutor, but if you found a resource that you really enjoyed, or you I don't know, found a specific scholarship or something, don't be willing, or basically be willing to give that information to those who come after you. And yeah, I think it's, at least on our end, I think it's really about encouraging those people who have those resources to share them with, their community members. Because I think what a lot of marginalized people are lacking is that community, or those connections that a lot of, wealthy people have, because they have lawyers in their families, or they have 10 lawyers or whatever it may be. And yeah, I think that's something that a lot of first gen students don't have. Yeah, so I think just building those connections. And also, if you're a student on the other end of it, don't be afraid to ask around. Like, you might not know as someone who is a lawyer, but you might have someone that knows someone who's a lawyer. And so just kind of expressing your interest in the field with just everyone, your family members, your friends, they will hopefully help you find someone, or yeah, find someone who has that information.
And you mentioned community. How important is community support in LSAT prep? I know some people have pros and cons about study groups.
Mhm.
I know there's some LSAT Discord groups and all kinds of other things. Like, can you share examples of how community has been helpful to students, or how they can maybe tap into their networks or other
Mhm.
supportive networks?
Yeah, so I will be honest, like for me, I wasn't someone who was prone to study with other people. I was pretty much on my own. But I think that, well, actually, that's partially a lie. So I did take live classes with LSAT Demon, and so that is where I found my community. And a lot of that was just from the idea that other people were in the struggle with me. Like, it wasn't just me on my own. And so I think that's a great way to go about kind of finding that community, is just have a course or go into a class with other people, just so you can see other faces, and kind of like be able to interact with them a little bit. It's not exactly like a typical class setting where you're, seeing these people before and after class, but, seeing other people's perspective on things is super helpful. I do think also that like a Discord group is going to be really helpful as well, because you're going to be able to find that encouragement from other students. And you might have a question that another student can help you with, or would also possibly have. And, there's going to be a lot of sharing of information. I do think, like you said or alluded to, that all that information isn't going to be the best. So take it with a grain of salt. But, it's better to, I think, have that resource than just to not have it at all, because then you're just on your own. And yeah, it's always better to have some help.
Yeah, I think so. I was by myself when I studied for the LSAT as well. I did not take live classes. I did an online course way back in the day of test masters, and so I didn't have friends. um, Although I think I imagined the live lecture that I was watching, I got to know the names of the students, probably from like a decade ago. But I can definitely attest to the importance of students coming together. So at Barrier Breakers, we have a student and alumni platform. And so, we always tell our students, we're like with you forever. You can't get rid of us. So we provide free support to our students throughout their entire time in law school. But they can start to form that community while they're in the process of applying. We do have an internal LSAT study group, but they can form groups for whatever they might want. But I think when I was a first gen student in law school, I think it was really important for me to have community, for me to ask those questions of people too. And I realized that not everyone may have that. I think I felt it a lot more in law school than I did in college, the need for community. And that was one of the things that really spurred us to create that alumni platform, is like, oh, our students actually still need this community when they're going off to law school. But I love what you are saying about, people needing to feel like they're not on their own, people needing to feel like there's other people that are going through what they're going through, because I think it can be a really isolating experience. So yeah, I'm grateful for all all types of LSAT study communities for our students.
Hmm.
One of the things I really want to talk about is the test itself. You are someone that you know the test. You tutor the test. Your students have done well. And the test has changed. The test has changed a lot in the last 5 years, I feel like. But, you know, we're here again with the new admission cycle. We have a new LSAT format that just came out this past August without the logic games. The writing section also changed a bit. What questions are you seeing from students? Where are students getting stuck? What advice do you give to students with this new test format? Like what's the LSAT advice?
Yeah, I think a lot of the questions are, the things that are just kind of logical questions or things that would seem to be the case. Like, what is different? How do I need to change my approach? And I think there seems to be a lot of fear with this change, right? Because it is a structural change. But I think that at the root of it, there isn't really that much that has changed with the test. Like, yes, on its face, there has been a lot that's changed. But what the test is actually testing has not, right? And so it's really just having those same skills that you would have had for the test 5 years ago or the test that you would have had before June. And yeah, they're still testing the same thing. I think with writing, there's been a lot of questions about like, should I have my own personal opinion in there? And I think one thing that I would say is that the writing portion is not necessarily to find out what you believe, but it's to find or to test how you can communicate ideas and how you can approach different viewpoints. They don't have to be your own. And so I recommend that people don't put too much of their own beliefs into them. But just focus on the topic, focus on what you would do as a lawyer, right? In advocating for one belief or another, whether you agree with it or not. Yeah, and I also think that, with the section going away, it really hasn't, I don't believe, had a large impact on scores, whether increasing or decreasing. And, if you were bad at LR or bad at RC before, or good at one or the other before, I think it's pretty much going to be the same thing, now. And they're both, I guess, as important as they were before. Obviously, LR's 2/3 of the scoring. But yeah, I don't think it's changed a ton. So I think the biggest advice is to, go about business as normal, I guess. Yeah.
So I've had a lot of students say, like, okay, but logic games was my favorite section,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm really bad at reading comp, and now, I can't just be bad at reading comp. And most tutors don't like tutoring reading comp. So
Mm-hmm.
what do you have to say for students that come to you and they're like, I hate reading comprehension,
Mm-hmm.
help, please?
Yeah. So I used to actually be like RC was my worst section as well, which I thought was really ironic because I was an English major in college. And I was like, oh, this should be easy. Like, I know how to read, I know how to comprehend things, or so I thought. And so also, Logic Games was my favorite, which is why I definitely wanted to take it before June. And, it panned out for me. But my biggest advice for RC is to not treat it like a book that you are trying to infer something from, right? You're not trying to extrapolate more information than what's already there. What the test is asking of you is to read it like a newspaper, right? And just, you need to know what the passage actually said. Like, what did it literally say? Not what do we think that the author thinks because of what they said. Like, no, the author will tell you if they have an opinion, and that's all you need. And so the biggest also, I think, misconception is that you can like skim the passage or read the questions to know what you're looking for. And it's like, well, if you spend all your time just reading the passage slowly, you'll have all the information that you need, right?
Hmm.
And I'm trying to think of an example, but it's I don't know. It just doesn't seem extremely wise to me to not or to neglect what you're being tested on. Like that's where the test is. And so spending all of your or most of your work in the passage, reading it slowly, reading it for understanding, like whether that's sentence by sentence or clause by clause. When you do that, then you're going to be fully equipped for the question, that whatever question that you're asked. And it's a lot harder, I think, to go backwards and say, oh, what was the main point of this passage without having read the passage thoroughly, you know? Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's my biggest advice.
That makes a lot of sense. I'm going to ask you about LR now because that's the follow up question. So there are some students that are like, logic games and reading comp were great, but I didn't love LR. And now it's, as you said, 2/3 of the test. Send help. Where do you see most students getting tripped up with LR? Is there a specific question type that students really struggle with? Or like, what are the issues?
Yeah, I don't know that there's a specific question type. I do think that one of the biggest issues that students face is focusing too much on questions that are out of their range, like out of their skill level. And I don't think that you need to necessarily focus on those, like, if you want to give levels of difficulty, like there's level 5 questions or 4 questions, when you aren't getting the level 1 and 2 and 3 right, you know, because you are basically, I'm trying to come up with these analogies and they're not coming to me right now, but
I'm
you're,
following you. I'm following you.
yeah, yeah, you're basically just going ahead of yourself and you're giving yourself less time to be successful on the questions that you would typically get right if you had more time in order to try and hope that you're going to understand these more complex questions that you haven't really mastered yet. Um, and so the advice that I always give is, and it's just like LSAT Demon suggestion, right? Is to answer less questions on the exam because you want to focus on getting more questions correct, and you're more likely to get those earlier questions right, no matter who you are, right? Because they're easier in the front. And then as you develop your skill, you will be able to answer more questions accurately. And, you know, the LSAT does not penalize you for wrong answers, meaning that you can guess on questions that you haven't gotten to, right? And still possibly get those points because there's a 1 in 5 chance that you're going to guess right. And so that's the advice. Like, don't rush ahead to answer all the questions because you're just kind of handicapping yourself on those easier questions.
That sounds like very solid advice. Just a couple more questions though for you. Okay, as we're talking about these strategies, I know that students often struggle with two things. They struggle with confidence and they struggle with test anxiety. So they might know all of these strategies about taking your time and reading the passage and, you know, focusing on what you can get right in practice. And then they have all of this anxiety when they go to take the test or they don't have the confidence anymore. So how can students, especially, like I said, students from maybe disenfranchised backgrounds who might be feeling imposter syndrome for even entering this entire process or may not have had a good history of test taking, combat test anxiety or lack of confidence?
Yeah, this was also something that I dealt with when I was in my study. I approached the test as someone who wasn't confident in the material when I first started studying, and really right until I started using LSAT Demon. And not to say that they were the sole reason that I had confidence in the exam, but I think something that they taught helped me get there. And also the same with anxiety. I get really anxious during an exam, and I think it helps me focus a bit more. So that is different for me. But a lot of people, it makes them flustered, and you know they're unable to focus on the material ahead of them. The biggest advice that I would give, and I think this is actually something a lot of marginalized and minority students don't know, is that you should be seeking accommodations if you have these issues. Like if you have ADHD, if you have, you know, any anxiety, depression, anything like that, you should be applying for accommodations because those are going to help you a ton, right? You, at the very least, if you're applying for a time accommodation, we'll get time and a half or up to double time. And one of the things that and like hinders these students from applying for this is because they don't know that it's there, and then also they don't necessarily have the resources to get you know in with a doctor and to be you know prescribed a medication or diagnosed or something like that. And so I would try like very hard to try to get those documentation or to get that documentation, whatever, course that may be. I will say LSAC is not strict about it. So typically when you ask, if you have some form of support, you will be able to get that accommodation. And so, and also don't treat that like, oh, it's an unfair advantage. You being like marginalized and also having that, I don't know that I want to, that disadvantage, right? The accommodation is to like level the playing field, is to balance the imbalance that exists. And, I would suggest that people kind of try and get over that because, you are already you're already at a disadvantage, and anything that can give you something that will get you into the position that you deserve to be in is going to be helpful. And then, so going back to confidence, when I approached the exam early in my study, I was approaching it as someone who was like hopeful. I would go to a question hopeful that I could understand it, or hopeful that I would get the answer right, because it felt like something that was not accessible. It felt like something that I couldn't understand. It wasn't in my language. It was using language that was just above me. And it didn't feel like there were concrete rules that would allow me to solve the question. After I started to take a different approach with the exam and translating it into my own language, which takes time to learn, and sometimes the language on the LSAT is very convoluted. It uses vocabulary that might not be familiar, but you can train yourself and learn the skills to translate that into whatever language that you are used to. And so that was a skill that I really developed, where I used to read a lot, but I don't have the largest vocabulary. I couldn't tell you what a lot of words mean, what the definition means, but I can use context clues to understand sort of what the passage is trying to say, and then interpret it into very common language. That led me to feel like extremely confident going into the exam, because I knew what the test was saying, and I also was able to go confidently into the exam because I knew that every single question was perfect, right? There's only one correct answer choice, and there's no like hemming and hawing, or you shouldn't be hemming and hawing between answer choices, because the test makers, right? They have to defend these questions legally, and so they have to be able to support that this answer is right, and all the other four are just completely wrong. And when you realize that, and you actually can start to believe that because of your practice, I think that kind of shifts your mindset, and it doesn't make you feel, oh, hopefully I'll be able to kind of guess which one is right, or see which one might be a little bit better than the others. You're hunting instead for which one is right.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I love that. Reggie, this has been amazing, absolutely amazing. And I'm excited because we get to have you on more often to help our students think through different LSAT questions, challenges, all the things. We don't do any LSAT prep here at Barrier Breakers, but we love working with people who do because we need both the admissions part and the test to be successful. If you love this podcast episode and you want to hear more from Reggie, you can contact Reggie at lsatdemon.com. You can also just reach out to us at Barrier Breakers, and we're more than happy to put you in contact with him. If you're looking for tutoring, Reggie, are you still taking tutoring students?
I am, yeah. So that will be through LSAT Demon. I believe you can find just lsatdemon.com/tutor. Yeah, that's exactly where you can find me.
lsatdemon.com/tutoring is where you can find, and you guys are accepting people for the October test, the November test. Those are the only 2 tests left in the year, September. So those 2 tests. If you have other questions, you can always submit them for free at bit.ly/breakintolawschool. And if Reggie comes back and you have an LSAT question, you can also submit your question there at bit.ly/breakintolawschool. Just put a little note so I know it's for Reggie. It's about the LSAT, because you guys don't want me answering any questions for you about this exam. I will steer you wrong, and I don't want to do that. As always, if this was helpful, make sure you share it with a friend. Sharing is caring. Like and follow, rate and review. Make sure you're following us on our podcast and subscribing to our YouTube channel, and put comments below. What questions do you have for Reggie? What are your thoughts about the LSAT exam? Where are you in this process? We want to get to know you better. You can always reach out to us as well at hello@barrier-breakers.org. We can't wait to see you. Reggie, thank you so much for being here again.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun.